Good evening, everyone. Hello to everybody in the room. Hello to people online. My name is Evan, and I'm going to be giving a talk tonight about attention. You may have noticed the title of the talk is Attention, Attention, Attention. And I want to talk about attention because it's a key component of our practice, and it's a really interesting arena to explore. And I want to start this talk by opening with the koan that's on your program. And I'm going to read through it twice, so folks at home, you can listen to this. A student said to Master Ikkyu, "Please write for me something of great wisdom." Master Ikkyu picked up his brush and wrote one word, attention. The student asked, "Is that all?" The master wrote, "Attention, attention." The student became irritable. "That doesn't sound profound or subtle to me." In response, Master Ikkyu wrote simply, "Attention, attention, attention." In frustration, the student demanded, "What does this word attention mean?" Master Ikkyu replied, "Attention means attention." I like these Zen stories. It's funny to hear them because there's this tendency to hear them as there's a winner and there's a loser. There's somebody who knows and there's somebody who doesn't know. And perhaps one of the readings of this is like a little bit frustrating. It's like, come on, this student's asking the teacher, like, can you give him something? But it's also interesting to frame it as potentially a relationship between a student, a practitioner who has wholeheartedly been practicing and really wants to transform their own heart, who really wants to be freer than they already are, as free as a glimpse that they've had previously. And the teacher, not just trying to be the champion of the conversation or to abruptly get back to whatever task they felt was more important, is actually kindly, warmly directing the student. I also appreciate a story like this one, where attention is the teaching over and over and over again, simply because that's really helpful for me. That's a helpful teaching. I need to hear things many times, actually more than 3. But for the sake of a reasonable talk title, we'll limit it to just 3. So, attention. So tonight, my hope is to explore attention with you in a way that's helpful for your practice. And that's what we do in Zen and Buddhist practice. In this tradition, we practice. We put in effort, we put in time. We pay attention to what's going on in our lives. We try to respond to what's happening in our own hearts, our hearts in response to the world, and we try to respond to others. So, as practitioners together, hopefully we can hear this in a way that is joyful or inspiring, genuinely beneficial. Because I don't know about you, sometimes practice feels like a lot of work. I gotta sit again. Oh, there it is again. So perhaps we can come to our practice with a little bit of sense of opportunity. So anyone who sat for 10 minutes, some of you sat for 40, some of you sat for 20, knows that the nature of attention is to move. Bring the attention to an object and then it moves. bring the attention to an object, then it moves. Sometimes it moves to the same familiar story that we've told 100 times about who we are, who another person is. Sometimes it's disjointed, imagistic. Sometimes it's dreamlike, confusing. Train the attention to come back. So anyone who's practiced for a period of time knows that the attention is very fickle. It moves. And sometimes it moves more intensely than other times. And also the attention can be trained. The attention can be trained. Now if I use a word tonight like trained, and for you you're like, enough training, enough heavy efforting. You know, a word like train could also mean guide, could mean to move toward, to make an adjustment, to recommit. So perhaps train is a great word. Like, yeah, I want to train. But if any word that I use tonight doesn't feel super helpful, see if there's a word that resonates with your experience. So the attention is trainable. So I want to talk a little bit about attention in our culture, just because it's pretty interesting. In fact, part of what inspired this talk was a podcast that I listened to. It was a recent Ezra Klein episode, and it was about attention. And essentially, this episode talks about ways to support our attention. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, check out the podcast episode. But I've been reflecting a little bit about what attention is like in our culture. And, you know, we often regard attention as a resource. Sometimes when we think about attention, the phrase pay attention comes up right away. And pay attention is often loaded, like do better. And also, our attention is consistently being captured, and our culture is designed to do so. I recently downloaded a little game on my phone that's been pretty fun. It's a Sonic the Hedgehog game, and I grew up with Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Genesis and PlayStation, and when I was in high school, PlayStation 2. And when I used to play Sonic back in the day, there were levels, you know. With enough skill, you get to the next level, and then you move on. And then you'd be stuck for a while, and then you'd learn kind of the ins and outs of this level, and then you'd move on. So this game is really fun for a lot of nostalgic reasons, for just taking a break, etc. But one thing that's been really, really interesting is this game. It's not necessarily about skill. There's like a little bit of skill. There's like this much skill. But the rest of the game is about how much time you play. So if you play long enough, you get rewards. If you get enough rewards, then you can move to the next level. So it's really kind of an interesting game structure. It's really about time on the game, opposed to like how skilled can you be in a level. And it's really motivating. I want to spend a lot of time in this game to get these little red stars to help me buy things. So it's just interesting to see the way that our culture is engineered to capture our attention, capture it. I'm also relatively new to Instagram, probably the last like 2 years. And my God, that is some compelling stuff. I was like, I will not be affected by this app. I practice Buddhism, no problem. In the beginning it was boring, but then the algorithm kicked in. They know exactly what I like, But another thing that was funny, I was musing with this with a friend of mine recently, is that it's funny even on Instagram, and I promise this isn't going to be the whole talk, this is just kind of like, an interesting exploration, that on Instagram, even if there's a video that's like a minute and a half, I'm like, too long, next, like 10 seconds seems to be the sweet spot. If you can't make me laugh in 10 seconds, moving on. Which is hilarious. It's really, really funny. And I'm making fun of myself because this is our situation. Like, this is the culture that we live in. This is like how technology has been engineered, and technology is not the villain, it's not the problem. But it's just interesting to see. So, if you feel that you're often distracted, that makes sense. If you feel like your attention is captured by various technology, or just your day-to-day, or this dance between email and Slack and email, huddle, if that's the kind of job that you have, or a page or a call, if you find that that is, wow, that's a lot to manage. It's a lot to manage. So it's interesting to pay attention to how culture intersects with Buddhist teachings. So, and from an evolutionary standpoint, we attend to novel phenomena because it helps us to survive. A quote that was in that podcast that I loved was, "When you get to the end of your life, the sum total of all the things you paid attention to will have been your life." Ooh, heavy duty. Will have been your life. Sum total. So built into that quote, of course, are all these like value structures of like what's good and what's bad. There is inherent value to life, and there is inherent value to simple attention. And at the same time, attention has a cause and effect. Our attention is compelled, there's an effect to what we attend to, and we'll explore a little bit more of that as we go on. So much of the Buddhist teachings either explicitly or implicitly address attention. So the Satipatthana Sutra, the foundations of mindfulness, talk about paying attention to form, feelings, consciousness, and objects of mind. And if you read the sutra, it talks about different objects of attention. Paying attention to the body within the body, paying attention to the breath, paying attention to whether it's a small breath, large breath, paying attention to the hindrances, paying attention to the sensations in the body. So there's a lot of teachings that explicitly address attention. And there's a lot of teachings that implicitly address attention. So if we really look at our practice, we can kind of see this laced throughout a lot of teachings. So this is important. It's an important part of our practice, attention. So as I mentioned earlier, attention is habituated, and it's often unconscious. So many people, when they sit on the cushion, I teach Intro to Zen meditation once a month, and a lot of people come to class, and a lot of people come to meditation with the expectation that when they sit, the mind will go still, and if it doesn't, it's evidence that they failed. And so many people think, well, I'm just not a good meditator. I'm just not a great meditator. I sit down and my attention moves, and I can't stay situated on the breath. I can't stay situated on the sensation of the body. It's just running all over the place, so therefore, I'm a terrible meditator. So, first thing that I wanted to say about that is, this is what the mind does. This is what attention does. It moves. And it moves in habituated ways. And so sometimes we sit down and suddenly we're like, all I'm doing is thinking. But what's actually probably more true is that all this thinking was happening before, but there wasn't the acknowledgement or noticing of this thinking, of this movement of attention. So when we sit down on the cushion and we encounter all this movement of mind, all this movement of heart, that's actually, if we're going to assign a value to it, it's really good. It's really good to see, because that means that you're seeing what's happening in your heart, in your body, in your mind. So there's also a tendency with our attention to try to hold on to the things that are really pleasant that we like, and also to push away the things that we really dislike. That's common. If you're honest, if I'm honest, if we're honest, we might also notice that sometimes we really stay fixated on the things that are unpleasant as well. Oh, that person said so-and-so, can't believe them. They haven't changed at all. Unbelievable. So, paying attention to where attention goes is really, really helpful in seeing this is what attention is doing, and then we have an opportunity to put the attention where we would like it. And it's not a matter of like trying to keep it there by gritting our teeth, but the ability to see what's actually happening and the ability to move our attention to a chosen object, to a chosen activity, is actually a really beautiful thing. A really beautiful thing. So as we spend time witnessing this process of attention, the attention naturally slows down. The mind naturally slows down. The heart naturally settles. I'm going to spend a little bit of time also talking about like ways to work with attention in our practice, because that can be really helpful. I feel a little guilty, but also I don't feel very too guilty. But in Zen we talk a lot about no technique. But I use a lot of techniques. I think that they're really helpful. So when I teach, you'll probably hear a lot of techniques. There's nothing wrong with techniques. Techniques can be really helpful. So, but like anything else, we can get stuck. So if you're using a technique that's helpful, that's really wonderful. And having the discernment to know when it's time to relinquish the technique and move to something different is important too. So, one thing that I do want to say just about attention and sitting, and then I'll get into some specific ways of exploring attention, is sometimes when our attention moves, this is a question that comes up a lot. We're sitting in meditation, the attention is moving, and it's moving over and over and over. Sometimes to the same object, sometimes to different objects, and I say object, and by that I mean like any sort of thing that arises. So it could be a thought, it could be an emotion, it could be a memory, it could be a fantasy, it could be a number of things. So that's what I mean by object, something that you attend to. Sometimes when the attention moves quite a bit, there can be this tendency to place the attention, the instruction early on is just place the attention back on the object of choice, breath, body. A pleasant sensation like metta, loving kindness can be really helpful too. Bringing it back over and over and over. That's the instruction. Gently, of course. And sometimes people are like, it just keeps going. It's just kind of nonstop here. So it can also be helpful to experiment with seeing if you just allow the attention to just move. Like, what is this all about? The attention's really moving here. what's going on? And maybe it was just surface thoughts for a little bit. Like, boy, I really hope that person at the gym isn't there tomorrow morning, the person that uses 2 benches and a machine all at the same time. I really hope they aren't there. And then it's just kind of persistent sort of thing. Paying attention to what might actually be going on. We might discover, oh, like underneath all of that movement of attention is actually this feeling of like frustration, bitterness, or what have you. So sometimes it's helpful to play with attention, to see what is the most helpful thing to pay attention to. Sometimes it's actually that feeling. A lot of times it's actually that feeling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about objects of attention. See what time it is. So again, usually when we begin practicing, we're given an object. The breath, the body, the emotional state, usually breath and body. So spend some time in your meditation familiarizing yourself with those objects. And see if there's a way to keep it novel, like asking questions. I notice that, even after all these years of practice, that sometimes when I'm trying to attend to my breath, that there's like this subtle conceptualization of what the breath is and what the breath should be like. So sometimes it's really helpful to play with how we attend. Like, what is the breath actually like? And where am I finding it in my body? And where does it go out? And when does it come in? And can I feel it in my legs? Playing with our attention can be really, really helpful. So spend some time. And when the attention moves, it can be really helpful to label. I've been reading some Pema Chodron of late, and her practice is really simple. Just thinking, returning. Thinking, returning. The label that she uses is thinking. And that can be really helpful. Sometimes it can be really helpful to add like a more specific label, like anticipating or imagining. Sometimes that can really help us to kind of see what's going on. In terms of paying attention to the body, that's a common instruction. I've mentioned the Satipatthana Sutra once. I do like to talk about this one. I think it's really helpful. But one of the things that it talks about over and over again is the body inside the body, or the breath within the breath. So when paying attention to our body, the sensations of the body, and then see how much of that you can bring in. Like, how much of the sensations can you bring to view? Not like enhancing, not like disrespecting the sensations that are there, but like, how much of it can you feel? So, can you feel the face? What about the throat? What about like the inside of the throat? What about the front of the chest? What about the back of the chest? What about like in the diaphragm? These would just be interesting things to explore there in practice. So our attention can get habituated, and so can our practice. It's also helpful to explore, so that's a little bit about objects of attention. It's also helpful to explore the cause and effect of what we attend to. Cause and effect. So, if you've been engaged in a certain activity, Maybe that's emails at work, or maybe that's, writing a grocery list, or whatever it is, watching Netflix, paying attention to what kind of the effects are of spending time directing the attention. It would be really helpful. Oh, when I think about that person at the gym who uses 3 benches, I'm just using a light example. This is a real example. But just using a light example. When I think about that person at the gym, and I kind of fixate on, are they going to be there? Am I going to get a chance to use the machine that I want? And that's not good etiquette. They should really do that differently. When I think like that, my body gets tight. So I know this. My body gets tight. Even in telling the story, I can feel like and a little bit of that is like a little embarrassment too, because I'm confessing to you that I have grudges with imaginary people at the gym. But so it's interesting to know kind of what the cause and effect of our attention is. And sometimes we really need to spend some time with the thing. Sometimes we really need to spend time with the thing. So maybe something's coming up and it's perpetual. It's coming up a lot. And we don't like it. And so we think, all right, I'm going to use this power of attention and I am going to not pay attention to that. It's pretty normal. But sometimes it's really helpful to turn toward that thing. Like, what is going on? What is that all about? What's happening? And likewise, when we attend to things that are beautiful, what's the result? Sometimes if I'm feeling a little bit grouchy at the grocery store, I will distract myself and bring in something that I like. Maybe it's the beautiful produce, maybe it's a kid that's driving around with one of those carts just banging into stuff, the giant flag that says shopper in training, which is like such a funny thing. Because it's helpful. So sometimes we really do need to pay attention to stuff that we really don't want to look at. That can be very immensely healing. And looking alone can be enough. And sometimes it's like, all right, Evan, time to drop it. It's time to move on. This is not helping you. So cause and effect. Or maybe we notice, I've been cranking out emails all morning, I'm feeling productive, feeling good, I might actually finally get to the next thing. And then we check in and we notice, oh wow, I'm a little fried at the moment, currently. And it might actually be beneficial to pull out Sonic and play that for a couple of minutes. Or it might be beneficial to go for a walk for 20 minutes. Or maybe eat. So cause and effect, really helpful. So another thing that's very helpful to pay attention to with attention is how we attend, or the quality of attention. I sat for a long time, many years, kind of silently, coldly enduring my experience. When are you just going to be done? You know? That's funny. That's really funny. If I just sit here still enough, it's just gonna stop. I will win. Attention means attention. This kind of thing. And it took me a while to realize, it took me a while to see that was happening. So paying attention to how we attend. And, a great antidote for that, coming from experience, is practicing gentleness, kindness, sensitivity, empathy with our own experience. Isn't that interesting that you can empathize with your own experience? Oh, wow, that's so challenging. Wow. Kind of cool. So how do we pay attention? What's the quality we bring? Jack Kornfield is a teacher that practices in the Vipassana tradition. And in one of his meditation instructions, he said something along the lines of training the attention is a lot like training a puppy. You know, the puppy moves off, we pick up the puppy and we bring it back and we say, stay. And it wanders off, we pick up the puppy and we set it down and we say, stay. And anybody who's familiar with Jack Kornfield knows that he has like a very sort of like beautiful sing-songy voice. He says, we don't beat the puppy. And I remember that just cracked me up. I thought that was so funny. It's also sad, but it's also funny. It's funny because it's our tendency. But it's also our tendency to be really gentle with the puppy. And when we attend, thinking about quality, also thinking about is this skillful, is this unskillful, is this helpful, is this not helpful? It's very easy to weaponize Buddhist practice. So sometimes skillful, unskillful, helpful, not helpful is actually just another way that we measure our practice and say like, yep, I knew it. Not good. Unskillful actually means not good. So conducive to kindness or conducive to a spacious heart. Those can be helpful questions. It's also really helpful to remember you're not the one moving your attention. The attention is moving on its own. When you choose an object, that's you. That's you moving it. So when it's unskillful, the choice, even the recognition, and then the choice to move it, sometimes it won't budge. We've all been there. Choice to be really gentle, be really kind, can be helpful. So as our capacity to attend deepens, and there grows with it a continuity to attention, there can be a lot of healing that happens. There can be a lot of healing that happens. And that healing can happen on its own. But when we start to play with the attention, sometimes what we notice is more subtle experiences start to arise. Memories, or, oh, I didn't realize that there was kind of an impulse, like a frustrated impulse there. I can see that now. A lot of healing can happen when this attention can get really stable. It's not that we need to force the stability of attention, but engaging in this practice does it on its own. And over time, there can even be a sense of, as attending is happening, that attending is also happening with an intention. More space. Maybe we notice that there's a primary object of attention and a secondary object of attention. It's a whole field of experience, inside and outside. Perhaps we notice when our attention is contracted, gets really narrow, rigid, or brittle. We can see when it expands. Can even encourage that expansion. This movement is really helpful in thinking about attention. We can kind of run through a little experiment just as we sit here. But a lot of times our relationship with attention is it gets contracted. It's contracted, it gets fixated, it gets small, it gets narrow. It's just what it does. And when we sit in Zen practice, Zen meditation, Zazen, the attention has a tendency to move outward. So the experiment can be, as you sit here, just start to include the room around you, the periphery, include the body, include sensations, just notice. And as I begin to talk, see if there's a tendency for the attention to try to narrow, which is okay. But when we sit in Zazen, we sit just to sit, bringing ourselves to the moment, letting the moment meet us, letting the attention move outward, including everything in our experience that we're able to include. The attention can expand. There's a story that's been on my mind. I loved, well, I still love Ram Dass. My first couple, well, my first mentor was a real hippie back in the day. So a lot of my early recommendations were, Ram Dass or Paramahansa Yogananda, stuff like this. But there's a story about Ram Dass going to see Chogyam Trungpa, who is Pema Chodron's teacher. And he's instructed, this is Ram Dass telling the story, and Ram Dass is saying, Chogyam Trungpa encouraged him to let the attention expand outward. I never really thought much about that story. It didn't really seem very interesting. Then Chogyam Trungpa said, don't try. Just let it happen. But I've been really interested in that story. It seemed kind of like a throwaway of Ram Dass's stories. And Ram Dass is was very charismatic and a great speaker. And that story didn't necessarily hold my interest, but there's this sense of we can really play within this field of attention. And there can be a lot of relief in playing with our attention. And if you're like me, I want to do that so that I can have a certain kind of experience. And that's a very natural tendency. But it's actually more helpful just to play with attention. So moving it into the body. Where in the body? What's it like? Asking questions like, where is my attention? How is it showing up? Where is it showing up? It can be very interesting. I think I'm going to end with just a question, a practice question, and then we can kind of open it up. But an interesting question to play with is what frees our attention? What frees our attention? And I can give some examples just from my own practice, and I think it's helpful to experiment. But what frees our attention? When I came to the cushion, when I walked in this building, my heart was a mess. Like, it was a mess. I had a lot of pain that I was carrying around. And when I sat, the pain really showed up, made itself known. But I learned how to engage with it. And it was interesting in the beginning of my practice, more of like a hunch, you know. It's like, I think this could be helpful. But there was an immense amount of pain, and I knew that not resisting my experience, not trying to hang on to my experience, not trying to check out of my experience, were helpful. And so I practiced that with a lot of technique, a lot of loving kindness, a lot of loving kindness, a lot of gentleness. And you know, sometimes Tim talks about this, I think, as like knots or somatic knots. What I've noticed over time is that the places in my body, the places in my heart, the places in my emotional experience that were incredibly painful, opening up to those, bringing attention to them, gradually began to soften me and those painful experiences. And so in a lot of ways, this is why, you know, Tim in particular is constantly talking about obstacles. The obstacle is where freedom is. Paying attention to those things gradually over time, and sometimes, you know, for like a day or 10 seconds, it changes it. So for me, it's really freed my attention. You know, I know that when I walked in this building, there's a lot of pain in my heart. And I know that by including the painful sources in my experience, my attention over time has become a lot less contracted, a lot less fearful, a lot less reactive. So what frees your attention? What frees your attention? I might want to say one more thing. There's an early sutta called Inappropriate Attention Sutta, and it's really short, and I just think it's like fairly brief and sweet and kind of silly. So I just want to read that to close, and then we'll open it up. This is, forgive me, I'm not trained in Pali or Sanskrit, but it's called the Anyoniso Manasikara Sutta, Inappropriate Attention. And this is a Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation. I have heard that on one occasion a certain monk was dwelling among the Kosalans in a forest thicket. Now, at that time, he spent the days abiding thinking evil, unskillful thoughts. That is, thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of doing harm. Then the Devadatta, inhabiting the forest thicket, feeling sympathy for the monk, desiring his benefit, desiring to bring him to his senses, approached him and addressed him with this verse. From inappropriate attention, you're being chewed by your thoughts. Relinquishing what's inappropriate, contemplate appropriately. Keeping your mind on the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, your virtues, you will arrive at joy, rapture, pleasure, without doubt. Then, saturated with joy, you will put an end to suffering and distress. And this is the closing line. The monk, chastened by Devata, came to his senses. came to his senses. We love a happy ending. You will arrive at joy, rapture, pleasure, without doubt. So, with that, we can open it up for comments or questions, your own observations about your attentional process. Love to hear from you.